From the Ear to There Travel Studio, this is the Ear to There Disney Podcast.
The Ear to There Podcast, it's time to start the show. Be sure to hold on tight, here we go. Exploring all the different Disney destinations. Ear to There, it's time to start the fun.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ear to There Disney Podcast. I'm your host, Phil Gramlich. I am also the owner and the founder of Ear to There Travel, which is a Disney specialized travel agency. It's my job, along with all of the vacationeers on the Ear to There Travel team, to take away all of the stress, all of the anxiety, and all the time that it takes to plan a Disney trip, whether it's to Walt Disney World, Disneyland, Disney Cruise Line Adventures by Disney, those non-Disney parks and Universal, don't tell anybody about that. Or if you want to book a trip anywhere else, it's our job to take away all of that stuff so you can focus on the really fun things like having a phenomenal time with your family and friends and enjoying the magic. And that's actually ironic because my guest this week knows a lot about the magic in more ways than one. You can find this podcast, meet any of the vacationeers on the Ear to There Travel team, and request your free, no obligation quote over at eartotheretravel.com. And just remember, our quotes and our services are all totally free. So we'll handle your fast passes, your dining reservations, transportation, special event tickets, you name it, we will handle it all at no cost to you. All right, let's get started. This is episode number 185 for the week of November 11th, 2019. Now grab a drink, grab a snack, and as a famous mouse once said, on with the show. What makes a person a fantastic leader? What made Walt Disney an unbelievable leader? Well, no one does a better job of explaining all of that than my guest today. Pat Williams believes that there are 7 timeless principles that make a great leader. These are learnable skills that are transferable to any team or any organization. They are vision, communication, people skills, character, competence, boldness, and a serving heart. I have to tell you, I read Pat's new book, Lead Like Walt, twice in the last couple of weeks. It is fantastic. It's full of stories about Walt that I'd never heard before. And that's really saying something because I've read a ton about Walt Disney. But Pat and his co-author, Jim Denny, dug really deeply into the history of the Disney company and spoke to those who knew Walt best, including his own daughter, Diane Disney Miller, and other Disney legends, including folks you know from this podcast like Bob Gurr and Rollie Crump. And honestly, I can't recommend the book highly enough. I love it. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give a copy of Pat's book away this week. So listen in at the end of this episode, at the end of the chat with Pat. No, that was not, it was not an intentional rhyme. But listen in to the end of the episode. I will ask a trivia question. And then head over to facebook.com/eartotherphil. Click send message, send me the answer to the trivia question, and you will be eligible to win a copy of Lead Like Walt. All right, without further ado, here is my interview, my talk with author, basketball Hall of Famer, and all-around nice guy, Pat Williams. Enjoy. My guest today is a basketball Hall of Famer, a longtime executive and general manager in the NBA, a corporate speaker, and an accomplished author with quite a few books under his belt. Mr. Pat Williams, thank you so much for coming on and welcome to the show.
Thanks a million, Phil. Nice to chat with you. Look forward to our visit here.
Yeah, and it's really nice of you to do it, and thank you so much for being so generous with your time as well. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Phil.
So I want to start off with a basketball question. I'm a big sports fan. I know you are. This might be a tough one, so you can plead the fifth if you need to. Who's the best player in your mind that you yourself drafted in the NBA? Was it Charles Barkley? Was it Shaq?
Well, the most impactful, you would have to say, was Shaq. He came to us in Orlando as a 20-year-old out of LSU. He'd played 3 years there, and he just kept growing and getting bigger and stronger and impacted the game in so many ways. Now, that is in no way to minimize the career that Charles Barkley had. He came to us in Philadelphia in 1984, and everything that you hoped Charles would do as a pro, he did. And then everything you hoped he wouldn't do, I'm kidding, after playing, he's done it too. I watch the TNT show from the studio, and there is Shaq, and there is Charles, two players that we drafted, and that brings back a lot of pleasant memories.
They're great together on that show too. The way they razz each other, and I love it.
Yeah, they and Ernie Johnson does a wonderful job of keeping some form of order. Kenny Smith is kind of the class clown, and the X and O's guy.
Yeah.
So the four of them have a wonderful chemistry, and it makes for great viewing, great listening.
It really does. So, changing gears a little bit, as a kid, you were friends with Rollie Carpenter, who was the son of Bob Carpenter, who was the owner of the Phillies at the time. And you were able to go to a lot of Phillies games and visit spring training. Do you have any favorite memories or stories about your time with the Phillies? And are you still a Phillies fan today?
Well, I am, Phil. You know, I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware.
Mm-hmm.
Rollie Carpenter and I were classmates in school, starting in pre-kindergarten, right on through at Tower Hill School in Wilmington. We were classmates. We were teammates in sports. And then after I finished college, I did spend 7 years in the Phillies organization, 2 as a minor league catcher and 5 running minor league ball clubs for the Phillies. So my roots are very deep in that organization ever since I was a small boy in the Wilmington area. So Rollie is still a friend. I speak to him regularly, and whenever I'm in Wilmington, they have a guest room that they hold for me for an overnighter. And so I have a great affection for the Carpenter family, who have been so good to me. And, of course, I continue to root for the Phillies, even though the Carpenters sold that franchise something like, 35 years ago or so, something like that. But Rollie, as he nears his 80th birthday, still roots passionately for the Phillies. To watch a game with him on television, you'd think he was still the owner. He's never lost his affection for that team.
Yeah, I mean, I was raised a big Phillies fan. And I still am, and I'm trying to raise my kids are 8, 7, and 7. So I'm trying to get them into sports. They're slowly getting there, but my oldest will sit and watch an Eagles game with me. But the Phillies she gets lost a little bit. You know, baseball is, I think, a tough game for kids who are young these days to kind of sit through.
Well, good point. Baseball continues to work on streamlining the game.
Right.
We'll see how that all turns out, Phil.
Yeah. So you were around amazing athletes in your career. Do you have a player who was the best leader you ever saw on the court or on the field?
Well, it would have to be Julius Erving. We brought Julius to Philadelphia in 1976, right in the peak of his career. But aside from that, Julius was a leader. He was a leader in the locker room. He was a leader at practice. He was a leader for the league. He was a spokesman for the league. He took seriously that role. And to this day, you'll never meet a nicer big-name athlete. He has time for people. Back when he was playing, he always took time with the media, never rushed anybody. And I would have to say, in answer to your question, it was Dr. J.
Yeah, I wish I could remember it. I'm 40 now. I remember Dr. J as an older player. I don't remember his career as much, but I certainly have, all the stories from my dad and my uncles and all that about how just dynamic of a player he was. So you brought in an NBA team to the city of Orlando. Which came first, your admiration for Walt Disney or the idea to move a team to that specific city?
Well, Walt came secondly. I moved here, left the 76ers in June of 1986, moved to Orlando with the idea of trying to create an expansion team here. We were successful in that venture, and we're in our 31st season now. But when I got here, in addition to the basketball effort, I got Disneyized, and I became particularly interested in the life of Walt Disney himself. I was fortunate to keep running into senior Disney executives who had worked with him back in California, and I would always pick the brains of these guys to learn more about Walt. The end result is I've written 3 books about Walt. The first one was called Go for the Magic. The second one was called How to Be Like Walt. And the third one, which has just come out, is called Lead Like Walt. And we look in this new book at Walt Disney through the narrow lens of leadership and what was it about him that made him such an exceptional leader. The book came out in September, and we've had an interesting response to it.
Yeah, I mean, I've read it. I read it through cover to cover once when I first got it, and I've gone back to it a bunch of times. I run my own business. I run a Disney specialized travel agency, so I love books like this. When you write a book like this, do you have a specific avatar or person that it's aimed at, or do you, how do you go about figuring that out?
Well, we've got over the years we've learned in our study and writing about leaders that there's 7 ingredients, 7 key qualities that every great leader has possessed. And so as we studied Walt Disney as a leader, we used that 7 principle theory, and then began to stick stories and anecdotes and material we've gathered about Walt into each one of those 7 categories. And that's really how the book was framed and how it came about. For example, the first quality would simply be called vision. Walt was a visionary. He saw the future before it got here. He saw way down the road before the rest of us. He saw the finished product clearly in his mind, and then he simply worked backwards, putting the pieces in place to turn that vision into reality. Every great leader that I ever studied was a visionary. They had this ability to envision what they wanted to accomplish, and then they knew how to put the pieces in place to bring it about. And Walt was certainly a master at that.
He was. I've spoken to Bob Gurr. I've had Bob Gurr on the show a lot. Rollie Crump, and I got to talk to Julie Andrews. The one thing that they all say is just how Walt knew how to put people together, and it could be people that completely had nothing, like they were completely opposites, but he knew somehow by putting them together that they would work out and make something special. I don't know what it is that it was about him that could figure that out, but they've all said that he had like this special quality and was able to do that.
Well, Phil, first of all, let me say how impressed I am that if you have had conversations with Bob Gurr and Rollie Crump and the immortal Julie Andrews, I tip my hat to you. Those are three huge names.
Oh, I got lucky.
In the world, in the world of Disney. Walt had the ability to recognize talent, first of all, and then he also had the ability to rearrange talent once he had people working for him. In other words, he could look at a man and say, you would be better off over in this department.
Right.
I see a better future for you there. And the guy would say, he initially, he would be confused, perhaps hurt, perhaps upset that Walt was moving him around. But years later, he would say, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because Walt saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And he knew that I would have a better career and be more valuable if I was over here doing this instead of that. And I was very comfortable doing that. And I became very uncomfortable when Walt moved me, but it was the best thing that ever happened for my career. So Walt was a keen judge of talent. He knew how to put pieces together. He knew how to fit pieces together that would form a cohesive team. It was one of his talents, among many. And so when these old veteran Disney guys would say that, I've spoken over the years, I've spoken to them too. And I found that to be exactly true, that Walt was a keen judge of talent. More importantly, he knew what it would take to put the right pieces together to have a very smooth functioning team.
Yeah, I mean, two of my favorite stories. One is the Blaine Gibson story, who had never sculpted before, and Walt's like, hey, you're going to be a sculptor now. And the other one is Exitencio, who had never written a script or a song in his life. And here he goes and writes two of the most iconic songs in the history of Disney, with Grim Grinning Ghosts and A Pirate's Life for Me. I know he didn't write the music, but the lyrics are all his. It's crazy to think that Walt saw something in these guys and was like, this is your new job. It would be, I just can't imagine it, but he had an amazing eye for that stuff. He really did.
Well, Phil, I'm impressed when you start dropping the names of these Disney legends.
Pat, I'm a Disney nerd from about the age of 13. I've been watching every film, reading every book I can. Yeah, I'm committed fully.
Yeah, very impressive. By the way, speaking of Disney nerds, the foreword to this new book, Lead Like Walt, written by Brooke and Robin Lopez, the NBA centers, now with the Milwaukee Bucks. But these two guys, big old 7-footers, Stanford University products, they are Disney fanatics. I mean, everything Disney they love. And I asked both of them if they would write the foreword to this book. They readily agreed to do it. And that's another little footnote to this new book, with Brooke and Robin Lopez writing the foreword.
Yeah, it's very cool that they were able to do that. Your books are full of stories that I've never heard. And like I said, I've read a lot, and I'm a super fan. And one of my favorite stories that I read, I think it's under the communication principle in the book, was when Walt would brew himself a cup or a pot of coffee in his apartment in Disneyland, wear a robe and slippers, and walk out with disposable cups and that pot, walk down Main Street at night and give it out to the workers on the night shift. First of all, I love that story. I just can't imagine somebody of Walt's stature doing that, but I guess that's what made him that great of a leader.
He never took himself too seriously. You know, he had great pride in his work and all, but he was always thinking about how this film or how this park would affect people, what kind of an imprint it would leave on them. That was always what was first on his mind. You know, he had this wonderful gift to create, but he also knew what the public would pay for, what they would buy. It's one thing to have great ideas and produce wonderful product, but if the public's not going to buy it, it's not going to be worth anything. And that was another great skill that Walt had. He knew what would sell.
Right.
And he was very good at producing product that would when it went to market, it would be successful.
Right. So, well, speaking of coming back a little bit to the Disney legends and the people that you spoke to when writing these books, who do you think has given you the most valuable stories and insight about Walt over the years?
Probably his daughter, Diane Disney Miller. When we wrote that second book, How to Be Like Walt, she could not have been more helpful. She was extremely kind. She answered my questions. And then she put me in touch with all of her grandchildren.
Wow.
So that I could talk to them and get their take on their grandfather and their grandmother. That was fabulous. And in the book, the second book, How to Be Like Walt, we quoted all the grandchildren. And Diane Disney Miller could not... And we write a story at the beginning of the book, Phil, of how Diane Disney Miller was so kind to me at the opening of the Walt Disney Museum in the San Francisco area that she was so proud of. And there, I went to it, and she reached out to me. I was a stranger, although we'd been in touch by phone, and she just treated me royally. So I became a lifelong Diane Disney Miller fan.
Yeah, I've read like tons of stories about her, and I unfortunately haven't gotten to get out to the museum yet. That's one thing that I absolutely need to get a chance to do. It's funny, I've been to Disneyland, I think 6 times in the last 3 years, and I live in Philadelphia, and I haven't been to San Francisco. So one of these times I have to make the pilgrimage out there to see it. I've heard it's just phenomenal.
Yeah, that's a must. To really grasp Walt and his life, his background, his upbringing. That trip to see that museum will leave a big mark on you.
Sure. Have you had a chance? I know it just came out a couple of days ago. Have you had a chance to see the Imagineering story, the first episode on Disney Plus?
I have not. I've been following all that in the newspaper.
It's been insane, yeah.
But they are Disney just keeps renewing itself. I'm a big Bob Iger fan. I thought the world of Michael Eisner back in the day. He left a big mark on Disney. And if you haven't read Bob Iger's new book, make sure you get it. It's a well worth getting. It's an interesting, very, very interesting read about his role at Disney and what he's done there. I would recommend that book highly.
Yeah, I have it. I actually reached out to his people to see if he'd be willing to be on a podcast. He was a little too busy, but they did send me his book. So I've thumbed through it. I haven't had a chance to read the whole thing yet. Like I said, I have an 8-year-old, 2 7-year-olds, so I read kind of when they go to sleep at night. And lately, with the Star Wars and the Disney shows that have been on Disney Plus, I haven't had a chance. But I will. So just kind of in closing, do you have a quote or a lesson? I'm sure you've gotten asked this 1,000 times, but do you have a quote or a lesson from Walt Disney that sticks with you kind of more than the others?
If you can dream it, you can do it. Walt Disney was a dreamer, you see, and he had a big dream when he took a private airplane ride over Central Florida in November of 1963. Looking down from that little plane, all he saw were lakes and open fields and marshy bogland. And he thought, boy, this is just the spot we need to start another theme park right here. Well, it was a big dream, huge dream, and that dream has become reality over the years. The dream continues to unfold, but it all started with Walt in that little private plane on November 22nd, 1963, looking down over this vast amount of land here in Central Florida. So and as a result, this whole city, I like to call it the City of Dreams. because everybody comes here. 2,000 people a week are moving here to Central Florida, and they all come with big dreams about a new life and starting a new life. And Walt pioneered this whole idea of dreaming big, and everybody who comes here, everybody who lives here has big dreams. So and then I often say, whenever I'm speaking to a group, it's because of Walt that we all live here. If Walt had decided to go elsewhere, well, we wouldn't be here.
Yeah, there could be a lot of people in St. Louis, in and around St. Louis, working for Disney right now if he decided to go the other way.
Well, he almost went there. Mm-hmm. But Augie Bush insisted that they serve beer in the parks. In St. Louis, that would just be the way it is. And Walt didn't go along with that. And then that's where that ended. And then he examined South Florida, down in the Palm Beach area. But he wanted more land, and they couldn't provide it for him. And eventually, that's why he settled up here in Central Florida. And it changed the course of this state, changed the course of a lot of things, a lot of millions of people's lives. And that's why we all live here, thanks to Walt.
Absolutely. It changed the course of my life. I came down as a college program kid and didn't know a ton about Disney and left. I learned a ton about life and how business worked, and decided I wanted to make Disney a part of my business and my life forever. So, yeah, if it weren't for him, it weren't for picking this spot in Orlando, my life would have turned out completely different. And I know a lot of people that can say that, tons. So, Pat, thank you.
Good.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Good for you. It's so nice to visit with you and talk about our mutual interest in Walt Disney and this new book, Lead Like Walt. And I'm so glad that you called me.
Me too, Pat. I really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed the call. So where can people get your book, Lead Like Walt?
Well, Amazon is always a terrific way to order books. But if you're near a Barnes & Noble, just go into the business section, and you'll see the book there. If I've been near that store, you'll see that I signed it. And I was in the Wilmington, Delaware area recently and signed books there at that big new Barnes & Noble. So that between the two, between Barnes & Noble and Amazon, you'll get the book, and you'll have a good time reading it, and I think it will have a big impact on people who are interested in leadership.
I'm definitely going to read it again right after I read Bob Iger's book. So, Pat, thanks again so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Everyone's going to go out and get the book. And thanks again.
Thanks, Bill. All the best to you. Thanks a million.
And that is going to do it for this week's episode of the Ear to There Disney Podcast. Thank you so much once again to my guest this week, Pat Williams. Like I said in the show, please go buy Lead Like Walt. It is a great book, and you will not regret it, so go get it today. You can also get it on the Amazon Kindle if you don't want the actual physical copy of the book. But speaking of the physical copy, as I said in the beginning of the show, I'm going to give away a copy of Lead Like Walt this week. All you have to do to be eligible for that book is to answer the trivia question I'm going to ask in a second by going to facebook.com/ear2therephil, clicking send message, and sending me your answer to this question. Pat Williams was the one who was responsible for bringing an NBA franchise to the Orlando area. Of course, the name they picked was the Orlando Magic. But what other names were finalists for the NBA Orlando team? There were 4 finalists. I need the other 3. So again, go to facebook.com/ear2thephil, click on send message, send me your answer, and if you get the answer correct, you will be eligible to win your very own copy of Lead Like Walt. So thank you in advance for sending your answers in, and thank you again so much for listening to this show. I really, really hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had fun, and if you did, do me a favor, please go to Apple Podcasts and submit a review and a rating for the show. just an honest review and an honest rating. You don't need to leave a 5-star review. Leave what you think. I really, really appreciate it. It'll help more people to get to find out about the show and to listen to the show. So thank you so much in advance for that. Just remember, there will be a new episode of the show next week, along with a new episode of the Walt Disney World Word of the Week. So look forward to those. Until next time, have yourself an amazing magic week. See what I did there? Thanks again for listening. Bye-bye.
Here to there, here to